The number on the screen read $71,400, and you sat perfectly still. It was 4:47 on a Tuesday in March, the fluorescent light in the Dayton office humming the way it always did after lunch, and your manager, a tired man named Gary Holbrook who wore the same navy tie on Mondays and Thursdays, had just told you that your raise was official, $13,400 more a year than you'd made the day before. You didn't smile right away. You didn't call anyone. You looked at the number the way you'd look at a stranger's face you were trying to place, and then you closed the laptop, and you drove home in the same 2014 Honda Civic with the cracked visor, and you didn't stop at the dealership on Route 4, even though you'd promised yourself for 3 years that the day you crossed 70, you'd finally get the truck. You didn't stop anywhere. You went home, made a grilled cheese, and sat at your kitchen table on Delmore Street doing the same thing you did every Tuesday, nothing that looked like anything at all. This is not a story about a raid. This is a story about the 18 months after it, when nothing visible happened, and everything happened. You grew up in a rented duplex outside Kettering, the kind with a shared driveway and a landlord who fixed the furnace only when it snowed. Your mother worked at a dental office answering phones for $11 an hour, and your father, when he was around, drove a delivery route for a beverage distributor and came home smelling like cardboard and diesel. You didn't lack love. You lacked room. Room to make a mistake with money and recover from it. You remembered being 9 years old and watching your mother sit at the same kitchen table you now had, doing math on the back of a church bulletin, moving numbers from one column to another like she was rearranging furniture in a house that was already too small. You didn't understand it then. You understood it completely now. So when the raise came, you did not do what Marcus Feld did. Marcus sat 2 desks from you, sold enterprise software licenses with a voice built for closing, and got his raise the same week you got yours, his to $84,000. By Friday, he had a black BMW 3 Series in the parking lot, financed at 6.9% over 60 months, and by the following Friday, he had a story about it for anyone who'd listen. You liked Marcus. That's the thing nobody tells you about these stories. The man who spends isn't the villain. He's just a man who believes, with his whole chest, that arriving looks like something, that if you've climbed, you should be able to point at the mountain. You didn't believe that. You'd never been able to afford believing that, so you did the unglamorous thing. You called your 401k provider and moved your contribution from 6% to 17%. You opened a taxable brokerage account with $9,000 you'd been sitting on in a savings account earning nothing, and you put it into a total market index fund, and you did not check it every day, because checking it every day was its own kind of spending. Spending attention, spending peace, buying anxiety with your own eyes. You kept driving the Civic. The air conditioning had stopped working the previous July, and you didn't fix it. You told people, when they asked, that you were getting around to it, and you let them believe whatever story was easiest for them, because explaining the real one took more energy than you had left at the end of a Tuesday. Nobody threw you a parade for this. That's the part that has to be said honestly. There is no ceremony for the version of you that didn't buy the truck. There is no applause for a Roth IRA contribution made in silence on a Sunday night while everyone else is watching football. You sat alone with your decisions in a way that had no photographs attached to it. And some nights, driving home past the car dealership with its rows of trucks lit up gold under sodium lights, you felt something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite loneliness. It was closer to the feeling of holding your breath underwater longer than everyone else in the pool, knowing no one on the surface could see how long you'd been down there, or why. Your sister, Dana, 2 years younger, worked as a hygienist 40 minutes away in Springfield and had her own version of the same test. She'd gotten a small inheritance the year before, $22,000 from your grandmother's estate, and put a down payment on a Ford Explorer. Instead of paying off the $14,000, she still owed on nursing school. You didn't say anything to her about it. You'd learned by then that the people who need to hear about compound interest are never in the room when you're the one talking, and the people in the room usually already know. Dana's payment was $410 a month. Yours, on the same theoretical purchase, would have been $0, because you didn't make one. The middle of this story is not dramatic. And that's exactly what makes it true. There was no single moment of triumph. There was a Tuesday in October when your electric bill was $61 higher than usual because of a cold snap, and you paid it without moving money between accounts, without the small flinch you used to feel in your stomach every time a bill came due before a paycheck landed. There was a Sunday in February when Marcus, at a work happy hour at a bar on Wayne Avenue, mentioned that his BMW needed $1,200 in brake work he hadn't budgeted for, and you nodded and said that was rough, and meant it, because you liked Marcus, and because you understood something he didn't yet, that the car wasn't the mistake. The mistake was that the car had arrived before the foundation had. You turned 31 that year. You still lived in the same one-bedroom apartment on Delmore Street, paying $825 a month, while co-workers who made less than you paid $1,400 for something with a balcony. You went on exactly one vacation, 4 days in Asheville, paid in cash, $640 total, including gas, and you came home and looked at your brokerage account, and it had grown by $3,100 in 4 months, not from anything you'd done, but from staying out of its way. That was the year you understood, in your body, and not just your head, the strange arithmetic of money that grows while you sleep. It felt less like magic, and more like planting something in soil you couldn't see, trusting a process with no visible proof, week after week, that anything was happening underground at all. Then the second raise came smaller, $6,200, less dramatic than the first, and you did the same thing again. You didn't upgrade the apartment. You didn't fix the air conditioning. Somewhere around this time, a coworker named Priya Anand, who sat near the printer and rarely spoke to anyone outside of meeting, asked you quietly one afternoon how you seemed so calm all the time, and you told her the truth, which was that you weren't calm, you were just not afraid of your own bank statement. And those were two very different things that looked identical from the outside. Marcus's BMW got repossessed in April of the 4th year. Nobody talked about it directly. You heard it the way you hear everything in an office, sideways, in fragment, through someone else's version of someone else's story. He'd financed a boat the year before. Something he'd mentioned once at a birthday lunch, with the particular brightness of a man who needed you to be impressed. The math simply hadn't held. He still came to work every day in the same gray Toyota Camry his wife drove, parked it in the same spot, told the same jokes at the same volume, and you never once felt superior to him, because superiority requires forgetting where you came from. And you never forgot the church bulletin, the shared driveway, your mother's handwriting moving numbers between columns that were never big enough. By the 5th year, the number in your brokerage account, combined with the 401k, had crossed $187,000. You hadn't inherited it. You hadn't won it. You'd built it the way people build things nobody photographed. One Tuesday at a time, one grilled cheese at a time, one decision, invisible and unremarkable in the moment, to not buy the thing that would have made the story easier to tell at parties. You bought a house that year, not because you finally could, you'd been able to for 18 months before you did it, but because you finally wanted to stop renting the version of your life you were actually living. A 3-bedroom on a quiet street in Oakwood, $214,000, 20% down in cash, a 15-year mortgage instead of a 30, because you'd learned that the shortest path between 2 points is rarely the one that feels good in the first year. Your mother cried when she saw it, standing in the kitchen, running her hand along the counter like she was checking if it was real. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. You understood exactly what the tears were doing that words couldn't. You still drove the Civic for another year after that. The air conditioning still didn't work. People assumed things about you that weren't true, that you were struggling, that you were careful with money because you had to be, not because you'd chosen to be, and you let them assume it, because correcting people's assumptions about your finances is its own kind of showing off. And you had promised yourself a long time ago that you would never become a person who needed an audience for their own restraint. Marcus asked you, once, at a work dinner near the 5th anniversary of that Tuesday afternoon, how you'd done it. Not in an envious way, in a genuinely curious one. The way a man asks a question when he's finally ready to hear the answer, instead of just the applause. You told him there wasn't a secret. You told him that the raise never mattered as much as the 18 months after it, when nobody was measuring you, when no one would have known the difference between the version of you that spent it and the version that didn't. You told him that money doesn't test you when everyone's watching. It tests you in a parked car, outside a dealership, alone, at 6:15 in the evening, deciding for the 40th time not to walk inside. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said he wished someone had told him that when he was 26, you didn't tell him it wouldn't have mattered if they had. Some things you have to arrive at through the ache of getting there wrong first. You knew that better than anyone, because you'd watched your mother arrive at hers through a duplex with a shared driveway and a furnace that only got fixed in snow. The story could end there, with the house in Oakwood and the number that crossed 6 figures and kept climbing quietly, unbothered, the way water finds its level without asking permission. But the real ending is smaller than that, and quieter, and it happened on an ordinary Tuesday, almost exactly 5 years after the first one, the same day of the week, the same tired light, though this time it was your own kitchen and not an office. You were making coffee. Your phone buzzed with an alert you barely looked at anymore, because the account had grown past the point where daily numbers meant anything at all. Outside, a neighbor was pulling out of his driveway in a new truck, the kind you used to promise yourself you'd buy the day you crossed 70,000. You watched him back out, glossy and rumbling in the early light, and you felt nothing you needed to explain to anyone. Not superiority, not regret, just a kind of stillness that doesn't have a name in any language built for people who are still deciding. You never bought the truck. You never told anyone that the reason your car still doesn't have working air conditioning is that you decided, one Tuesday, that comfort could wait a little longer than everyone else was willing to wait, and that the waiting, itself unphotographed and unwitnessed, was the entire fortune.